In designing the space elevator, I've already had to come across some incredibly fascinating things to think about, such as, for instance, what would the effect of Aurora Borealis be on the space elevator just above the Kármán line? So what I'm planning on building, or what I'm designing rather, is a space elevator to reach 100 kilometers into the atmosphere, just above the Kármán line. This kind of pretty much arbitrarily chosen line that demarcates the edge of space, right? So what we call space is anything that lies basically 100 kilometers above Earth, above the Kármán line. And yeah, at this sort of altitude in the thermosphere, what we have are satellites orbiting in low Earth orbit, and we also have Aurora Borealis in these zones, so more towards the northern hemispheres, right? The northern hemisphere. And I believe the Southern Hemisphere has an equivalent to Aurora Borealis, or I don't know exactly, but it might not be important for the purpose of this video. But yeah, like, so what would, for instance, long-term exposure, for instance, to say a space station, I guess, up above the Kármán line, which is what I'm imagining, propelled probably by ion thrusters, and yeah, with the rest of the stages of this huge tower being supported by rocket engines, which was just the missing ingredient that I needed to make this work. I've had these ideas of ring structures with dirigibles and jet engines in my mind for years and years at this point, or like for a long time at this point. I've been thinking about, yeah, the dirigibles and jet engines, and to get us up to 100,000 feet or so, or up to 150,000 feet maybe at a push. And after all, you don't need the jet engines to provide lift. Quite the contrary. What the jet engines are for is to provide stability, to stabilize it, to keep it roughly kind of, you know, level and stop it snaking around. You also need the jet engines actually to push it down again, to counteract the lift. That's what those are there for, to make sure that your space elevator remains nice and slack, or slack-ish, such that you take tension away from the structure, such that you don't need to then utilize materials such as carbon nanotubes, which is the major benefit to the design that I'm working on. So yeah, we wouldn't need anything like carbon nanotubes. No waiting around for new materials. We can get going on this right now if we want to. We can build to the end of the stratosphere, I think. Certainly. So what's at the end of the stratosphere? That is where weather balloons get to. So this is the kind of everything up to 150,000 feet or so. That is all territory that we're quite capable of navigating, that we're quite familiar with. I mean, we've been sending weather balloons up for ages and ages and ages. We can get to 150,000 feet without too much trouble, or 120,000 feet without too much trouble. Anything beyond that, anything up into the mesosphere and the thermosphere, up towards the Kármán line, like, we don't really send anything through that unless it's a rocket. We send, like, not even high altitude spy planes and things don't really go into the mesosphere, I don't think, quite. They, again, like a weather balloon, those skirt around the top of the stratosphere more like, as is my understanding. So really anything going through the mesosphere at all is so like spacecraft returning to Earth, things like that, Soyuz capsules, space shuttles, whatever, those return to Earth at blinding speeds, like Mach 23 times the speed of sound. Very, very, very fast. That's what the return to Earth is. Yeah, then the other component I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking I want to ensure that the least amount of things possible can go wrong with these rocket engines, these rings of rocket engines in the mesosphere, which is really the lion's share of the space elevator. So I'm picturing about once every kilometer or so, you need a ring structure of rocket engines. Again, correcting the snaking of the cable, maintaining slack in the system. So what it'd have to do in the reverse way to the way in which the jet engines and dirigibles do it. The dirigibles create the lift, the engines push it down. What the rocket engines would have to do is create lift, and then they just have to cut off at some point so they go back down again and like hover in that way, right? So that, I think that is the only way of getting through the mesosphere with a space elevator. I think it's actually the only way to get through the mesosphere with anything, with any kind of craft. I think it's always going to be a rocket engine. That's what you need in that environment. It could possibly be ionic, I suppose, eventually, the thrust, but I don't know how well, for that matter, ions work at propelling things inside the atmosphere. We don't use ion thrusters at all inside the atmosphere, as far as I'm aware. Those power satellites and things like that. So once, rather, the Kármán line, this point of 100 kilometers, I wanted to put the end kind of space station, or Kármán station, or whatever you like to call it, on the end of this 100-kilometer machine, this elevator. I wanted that to be powered by ion thrusters, so I think it would sort of suit the environment in which it's located. It's advantageous because you can have like a nice big solar array up there, and yeah, and you don't have to keep pumping fuel up there, crucially, if you have ion thrusters. But on this subject of pumping fuel up there to ensure that not so many things can go wrong up at altitude. So you had to keep sending astronauts up there to fix this thing, right? Sorry. So you have to keep sending astronauts up there to fix this thing, right? Yeah, I want to try and pre-burn everything on the ground and then send it up the pipes. Send it up 100 kilometers of pressure. So it'll be like 300 psi of pressure. Loads of pressure, basically. Very, very high pressure system is what this thing would be. Then sending the pre-burned propellant and oxidizer like through a frost chamber at the top, and through kind of Delaval nozzle combustion chamber thing, like at the very top. So it would minimise the amount of things that could go wrong with all the components up there. But as ever, I really need a partner to work with me on this. I think I've got this design more or less figured out. It's totally unique. No one's working on anything like this at the moment. This is all me. Or NASA did release this report on balloons, dirigibles. I don't think they introduced the idea of jet engines though, and they certainly didn't introduce the idea of rocket engines onto a space elevator. But all those things make it possible. I just know that this is possible, so this is what I want to pursue now, I think. More like. And still going with my plan to spend a few more months here on this farm, earning up some savings money, then borrow money, then office, then try and build prototypes and things like that. Yeah, and do this for real. Build the space, build the world's largest machine, 100 kilometers of machine, of elevator, of pipeline, flying pipeline, whatever you like to call it, tower with jet engines on it. You do the same thing with a skyscraper, by the way. You could build basically as high as you like, as long as you've got jet engines on there accounting for that tensile strength, or counteracting that tensile strength. But then again, there's jet engines, like where are you going to get the fuel from? And how much fuel is it going to be, right? And all this sort of thing I've got to figure out. But I need, again, people working with me, people who can share the load of doing the calculations and things like this. I can't do it all on my fucking own, not this sort of thing. These sorts of things are only ever successful in huge collaborations, like we're building the LHC, so I do need people with expertise working with me on this.